What the scariest true story you know? The story of the Lake Nyas disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth, because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way, very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I was there till 9 o'clock in the morning of Friday, the next day, until a friend of mine came and knocked at my door. I was surprised to see that my trousers were red, had some stains like honey. I saw some starchy mess on my body. My arms had some wounds. I didn't really know how I got these wounds. I opened the door. I wanted to speak. My breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead. I went into my daughter's bed, thinking that she was still sleeping. I slept till it was 4:30 in the afternoon. On Friday the same day, then I managed to go over to my neighbors' houses. They were all dead. I decided to leave, because most of my family was in one. I got my motorcycle. A friend whose father had died left with me for one. As I rode through Nyas, I didn't see any sign of any living thing. When I got to one, I was unable to walk, even to talk. My body was completely weak. The Nutty Putty Cave incident. A spelunker got stuck upside down in a narrow cave for 26 hours. Crews tried to pull him out with pulleys, but had to be careful not to break his legs, because that could be fatal with the circumstances he was in. Rescuers even almost dislodged him, only for an anchor to fail at the last second, plunging him back into the crevice. He eventually died, and they sealed the cave shut with him inside. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, me and my twin brother would help our friend do his paper route. One summer we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later, when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack and his cats were eating him. It seems to happen a lot. Yes, it does. My grandfather's brother was an old man that lived alone. One afternoon his neighbors started calling my family because there was a strange smell coming from the house. We all imagined what had happened, as I was in my 20s and apparently the only one that could get inside the house. After jumping his backyard fence, we didn't have the keys from his house. I was assigned the task of going inside. As soon as I reached his bedroom, I noticed his corpse lying near the bed. The smell was awful. I remember turning my side to see the bedroom, and as I was rolling my head I kept my head going until I faced the way out again. That was enough. Took the meds, too many attempts to remove his body and take it to the morgue. My father told me they were puking a lot. Apparently the body had been laying there for quite a few days, and it was starting to decompose. In the 80s there was a Mexican cult led by an American named Adolfo Constanzo. They used to kidnap random people from tourist towns and nearby cities and perform human sacrifice on them in their rural Mexican desert compound, usually torturing in elaborate rituals for hours or days before finally letting them die. These rituals included vivisections, castrations, eyeball removal, tongue removal, teeth pulling, skin flaying, hanging, etc. They used amphetamines and cocaine to force the victim to stay awake during the torture and not pass out from shock. The cult believed the more pain and fear they could generate in the sacrifice victim, the more powerful the body parts would be as ritual trinkets, and also for food for the cult's nganga, which is a large ritual cauldron used to store bones, blood, meat, and other valuable items that the cult believed gave them power. They used to make staves out of wired together spinal columns, and they would often eat the victim's eyeballs during the rituals. They are believed to have kidnapped and sacrificed over 26 people to their nganga in their 3 years that they were active from 1986 to 1989. The leader committed suicide when the police showed up at their compound. They arrested 14 cult members, but most people believe there were at least a dozen more that escaped and are still out there. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing. But something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around in the snow. Alison Botha. On December 18, 1994, Port Elizabeth resident Alison Botha was abducted, raped, stabbed and left for dead by Frans du Toit and Thunes Kruger. They slashed her throat 17 times, so deep she had to hold her own head on as she crawled to the road for help. With her other hand she had to hold in the organ spilling from her stomach, where she had been stabbed more than 30 times. By some miracle the knife thrusts had missed her main arteries, so she did not bleed to death and was able to breathe through her severed trachea. There is a documentary that is on Amazon Prime called Alison. Worth the watch, but might be traumatic for some viewers. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor, and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it, and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids. It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess. It was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva, and within 2 days the wound closed, and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. Too long didn't treat patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid, and I removed the larva. The story of Jane Kloss is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job at which he only lasted a day and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning, no grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. The Rihanna Mariquin story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it, he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him. After confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA, the lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. The story of Hugh Glass. The man was left for dead after being mauled by a grizzly bear. 2 men were supposed to stay behind with him, but they were scared of Indians showing up. According to Wikipedia, Glass, who in the best historical accounts crawled and stumbled 200 miles 320 km to Fort Kiowa, South Dakota, after being abandoned without supplies or weapons by fellow explorers. The man traveled 200 miles on foot while badly injured with the motivation of killing the 2 men who left him behind. He forgave one of them and he couldn't touch the other guy cause he joined the army. You get the death penalty for killing a soldier. The movie The Revenant was loosely based on it. Great movie by the way. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not exactly a ghost story, but as a parent that scares the shit out of me. Reminds me of a story. Dad, Mom, 3 kids decide they want to spend a weekend away at their cabin. But Dad has to work on Friday. They decide Mom kids will go on ahead without him, and he will meet them at the cabin Saturday morning. Gigantic storm rolls through and suddenly a ducking tornado touches down. It destroys part of town, including the neighborhood where the family lives. Dad is a firefighter, so they are swamped with rescues, but Dad is happy his family is safe at the cabin. His truck finish their active calls and decide to take a drive around town to look for anyone needed help and see all the damage, and they drive down the family's street. The house is half destroyed, but more importantly, Dad spots Mom's car in the driveway. Mom, all 3 kids died because they had decided to wait for Dad as a surprise. There was over 25 deaths in total from the tornado. Dad ended up committing suicide a year or so later. The story was told to my dad when he went through first responder counseling by the firefighter Dad's old co-worker. Explorers like a century or 2 ago went to look about the Arctic, but had their supplies accidentally destroyed, and soon they all ran out. They hunted a polar bear and ate the insides of it. Noon at the time knew about how deathly a polar bear's liver was because of the high amounts of vitamin A, which can be bad for skin too. Toxicity made him and his crew deathly ill, and when one of them felt that their foot was wet, he took it out, and the lining of his skin came off with the boot. True story. Too long didn't read. Explorers killed a polar bear, ate its liver. X-Men under the effects of vitamin A, skin loss and toxicity, and most probably died. The silent Gibbon twins. 2 sisters who rarely spoke except to each other. They were sent to separate boarding schools to get them to talk to other people, but entered severe catatonia. They were eventually hospitalized and made a pact that if one of them died, the other must speak and live a normal life. They had a months-long discussion and decided which one should commit suicide. Eventually, one died of heart inflammation with no causes noted on the autopsy, and just moments after the planned time the other spoke. I'm free at last, liberated, and at last Jennifer has given up her life for me. There was a guy in my town who stalked women at the furniture store. He would watch women pick out new chairs and he would just linger there and drop these strange comments. That chair would look nice in my den. Then one night he followed one of the women home. He sneaked into their living room and then wait for them to enter the room. He'd then jump out and surprise them. He'd yell, "I knew you took my chair," and he'd scream and chase them. This happened over the course of 5 years. The local police never did anything because he was brothers with the sheriff. Women couldn't buy furniture by themselves. They had to start bringing chaperones. A guy I was good friends with had a party one night and called me to invite me over. It was me and my wife's first day off together in a while, and our daughter was 2 years old. I mentioned it to my wife and my daughter said, "No, don't go daddy." Of course I can't resist that, so I stayed home and we had a good night. My friend, however, had the worst night of his life. His party was going good and everything was fine, even though there was a friend of a friend there who no one really knew. Turns out the stranger had been smoking PCP and decided to start killing people. He took a butcher knife and slashed 3 people's throats. My friend's wife threw their kids out of a 2-story window and jumped out herself. Took them into the woods and called the police. All 3 people died. The police found the guy walking down the side of the road covered in blood and incoherent. He had no idea what he just did, so he said, "What really pisses me off is he was such a good guy. He was a big biker looking teddy bear, was never an asshole to anyone, and always did what was the right thing. We worked together and hit it off from day one. Always ready with a joke and smile. Maybe not going saved my life. Or maybe I could have helped. That weighs on me even 20 years later. The fact that some little post destroyed the lives of 3 good families that he didn't even know really pisses me off, and I hope he rots in prison and gets his ass kicked every day. Rip Blaine. You were a good man." The survival story of Mary Vincent. Picked up as a hitchhiker, Mary was driven out to the middle of nowhere, raped, and left for dead. But not before her attacker chopped both her arms off above the elbow and tossed her over the side of the road and down a ditch. She crawled back up and onto a pitch black desert road and followed the sound of the highway to try and get help. Nude, dirty, bloody, and missing both arms, she was picked up and rescued by a couple on their honeymoon. I'd link an article, but you need to hear it from the mouth of KariGilbert. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.